Did God really create the world in 7 days? Is that really what Genesis 1 and 2 are trying to tell us? This is a popular view today, but you might be shocked to find out that this has not always been a popular view amongst Christians, and scholars have debated Genesis 1 for centuries. But in this video, we're going to re-examine Genesis 1 in light of its cultural context and find out what the original audience would have had in mind. And it might not be what you think. Let's go. Welcome to the Word Room, where we make difficult Bible passages make sense. This video is a continuation of my series on Genesis chapter 1 through 3, and looking at what these passages actually say. In the last video, I explained that Genesis 1:1 does not actually say, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," but rather the correct Hebrew reading is "when God began creating the heavens and the earth." If you have not seen that video, I encourage you to go watch that video to get the foundations for what we're going to build on today in this video. The link for that video will be down in the description as well as in the pinned comment. So let's pick up where we left off in the last video. We saw that Genesis 1:1 is a dependent clause and not a complete thought on its own. When God began creating the heavens and the earth. Verse 2 is telling us the conditions of what was when God began creating. The earth was without form and void. And verse 3 is telling us what God did to begin. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Another way of saying this is that verse 1 was a dependent clause, verse 2 is a circumstantial clause telling us the circumstances, and verse 3 is the main clause. Now I'm going to show you why that's important in just a moment, but did you know that when Genesis 1 was written, there were other creation stories? An interesting feature of them is that many of them open with this exact same syntax: dependent clause, circumstantial clause, main clause. Let's look at a few examples. The first one is the Enuma Elish, which is an old Mesopotamian creation myth. And this is how it starts. When in the height heaven was not named, and the earth beneath it did not yet bear a name, and the primeval Apsu, who begat them, and Chaos, Tiamut, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field was formed, no marsh was to be seen, when of the gods none had been called into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies were ordained. Then were created the gods in the midst of heaven. Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. You can see the same breakdown. You have the dependent clause, when in the height heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name. Then you have the circumstantial clause giving the conditions or circumstance at that moment, and the primeval Apsu, who begat them, and Chaos, Tiamut, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field was formed, no marsh was to be seen, when of the gods none had been called into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies were ordained. So that's the circumstantial clause, or the conditions at that time. And then you see the main clause, then were created the gods in the midst of heaven. Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. Here's the dependent clause, when this is the situation, here are the conditions, and here's what happened at that beginning, at that time. We also see this in the Ugaritic texts that tell us a lot about Canaanite culture, for example. In the Car 4 tablet, it says this: after heaven was separated from earth, its firm companion, so the mother goddesses could live there after building up the earth to make the ground firm, when the designs were made firm in heaven and earth to establish levee and irrigation ditch in good order, the gods, the great gods, the Anuna, the great gods, sat down in a lofty days, and Enlil himself deliberated. Again, dependent clause, circumstantial clause, main clause. Dependent clause, after heaven was separated from earth, its firm companion. Dependent, what comes next? The circumstantial clause. So the mother goddesses could live there after building up the earth to make the ground firm, when the designs were made firm in heaven and earth to establish levee and irrigation ditch in good order. So here's the conditions. We've got irrigation and levee in good order. We've got the goddesses living there, etc. And then we get to the main cause. The great gods, the Anuna, the great gods sat down in a lofty days, and Enlil himself deliberated. So after all this happened, here's the conditions. Now Enlil is deliberating. We even see this in the Atrahasis. When the gods were man, they did forced labor, they bore drudgery. Great indeed was the drudgery of the gods, the forced labor was heavy, the misery too much. The 7 great Anuna gods were burdening the Ajiji gods which are the lower gods, with forced labor. You see this same situation. You have the dependent clause, when the gods were man, and then you have the circumstantial clause, which tells us the circumstances, what was going on at that moment. They did forced labor, they bore drudgery. Great indeed was that drudgery of the gods. The forced labor was heavy, the misery was too much. That's the conditions, the circumstantial clause. And then the main clause, the 7 great Anuna gods were burdening the Ajiji gods with forced labor. So the higher gods were burdening the lower gods. So again, it breaks down dependent clause, circumstantial clause, main clause. This seems to be a theme within creation myths of that culture. And this same structure is being used in Genesis 1. And that's important because it tells us that the author of Genesis, who I believe to be Moses, but that's a video for another time, was writing with this specific cultural context of creation myths in mind. This is important for us to understand the purpose of Genesis 1 and what it is speaking of. It's important to know that Genesis 1 is not a science book. It is not giving us the scientific facts of the origin of the universe. This book is instead theological in nature, and that is important to know. Often when we read the Bible, we read it from our 21st century modern Western way of thinking, and we try to force fit that into the text. However, the Bible wasn't written in the 21st century, and it was not written from a modern Western way of thinking. When we read the Bible, we need to ask, what was the cultural understanding of the text? What would the culture at the time have thought the text to mean? And what would it have meant to the original audience and author? In this case, the cultural context would have been these ancient creation stories and myths. Not only because this is a creation story, but also because the beginning of this story was written intentionally with a format that would link it to the other narratives. The question is why? What was the point of these other narratives? And what was the point of Genesis referencing them? Well, first, let's look at what we know about these other stories. Let's look at the Enuma Elish again, for example. I'm going to summarize the story for you to highlight something very important. In the beginning, there was only undifferentiated waters swirling in chaos. Out of this swirl, the waters divided into sweet, fresh water, known as the god Apsu, and salty, bitter water, the goddess Tiamat. Once differentiated, the union of these two entities gave birth to the younger gods. These young gods, however, were extremely loud, troubling the sleep of Apsu at night and distracting him from his work by day. Upon the advice of his vizier, Mumu, Apsu decides to kill the younger gods. Tiamat, hearing of their plan, warns her eldest son, Enki, and he puts Apsu to sleep and kills him. From Apsu's remains, Enki creates his home. Tiamat, once the supporter of the younger gods, now is enraged that they have killed her mate. She consults with the god Quingu, who advises her to make war on the younger gods. Tiamat rewards Quingu with the tablets of destiny, which legitimize the rule of a god and controls the fates. And he wears them proudly as a breastplate. With Quingu as her champion, Tiamat summons the forces of chaos and creates 11 horrible monsters to destroy her children. Enki and the younger gods fight against Tiamat futilely until, from among them, emerges the champion, Marduk, who swears he will defeat Tiamat. Marduk defeats Quingu and kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow which splits her in two. From her eyes flow the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Out of Tiamat's corpse, Marduk creates the heavens and the earth. He appoints the gods to various duties and binds Tiamat's 11 creatures to his feet as trophies, to much adulation from the other gods, before setting their images in his new home, this heavens and earth he created. He also takes the tablets of destiny from Quingu, thus legitimizing his reign. After the gods have finished praising him for his great victory and the art of his creation, Marduk consults with the god Enki, the god of wisdom, and decides to create human beings from the remains of whichever of the gods encouraged Tiamat to make war. Lulu, the first man, was created to be a helper to the gods in their eternal task of maintaining order and keeping chaos at bay. A priest to the gods in their new cosmic temple. Here are some key points from this story. There were these chaotic waters that they viewed as gods. Marduk rose up as a champion and fought a battle with Tiamat, which is the chaos waters. And after a struggle and a battle, defeats Tiamat and her monsters of chaos. And from the corpse of Tiamat, the chaotic waters, from out of the chaotic waters, Marduk brings about the heavens and the earth, which is labeled his new home, a cosmic temple. And humans are created to be priests to help the gods. Ancient Canaanite stories had these exact same ideas. Yam, the Canaanite word for sea, was a god for the Canaanites, and Yam was defeated by Baal. There are definitely some similarities between this story and the Genesis account. There are chaotic waters from which the heavens and the earth are then formed and created. Humans are then created, and we see that they are in the image of God and have dominion and are told to subdue the earth, to control the chaos. But there are also some very important differences. There is no battle in Genesis 1. The chaotic waters are not gods who put up a fight. Instead, there is only one true God, and he controls the chaos. And he brings order out of the chaos without even breaking a sweat. He doesn't need to fight a battle to win and be the champion. Instead, he is the all-powerful one that controls it all without a battle, without a struggle. How do we know that this is what the original audience had in mind? Aside from the fact that it's written with these similarities, as well as it being written with the same grammatical structure in the beginning to associate it with them. Look at how Asaph speaks of creation in Psalm 74 when he talks about dividing the waters, bringing dry land, separating night and day, creating the seasons, which Genesis 1 talks about. Psalm 74, 12 through 17 says, "For God is my king of old, working salvation in the midst of the heaven. Thou didst divide the sea." Hebrew word here for sea is Yam. Do you remember Baal or Bel fighting against Yam, the sea god, and destroying him? Here it says, "Thou didst divide the sea, Yam, by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons." Hebrew word here is tanin. We'll talk about that word in a moment. "Thou did breakest the head of the tanin, the dragons, in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Thou didst cleave the foundation and the flood. Thou driest up mighty rivers. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Thou hast set all the borders of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter." The idea of the light and the sun and summer and winter and setting the boundaries of the ground and dividing the waters, these are creation terms. This is reflecting back on Genesis 1. And what's massively interesting is the words it chooses to use. The word for sea, as I already said, is the Hebrew word Yam, which is the name of this Canaanite sea god that was defeated by Baal. The word dragons or sea monsters, dragons in the water, these sea monsters, it's the word tanin in Hebrew, which is the Hebrew spelling of Tiamat from the Enuma Elish that we read a moment ago. Leviathan is the Hebrew spelling of Latanu from the Ugaritic text, which is the servant of the sea god Yam, and was also defeated by Baal. Asaph connects these creation myths to Genesis 1. Asaph indicates that Yahweh defeated all of the chaos gods without a fight. He says he defeated them, but we see he's connecting this to Genesis 1 where there is no battle. Yahweh simply speaks and they are defeated and must submit to the order that Yahweh brings about. This is the cultural context of Genesis 1 and 2. What is the point? Yahweh, the God of Israel, is the one true God who is above all. He is more powerful than the gods of all these other myths. He doesn't have to battle or fight, but in simply speaking, he has power over them all. The Genesis creation account was a direct theological response to the creation myths of the time. It was part of the Torah given to Israel to show Israel that their God was the one true Most High God, worthy of worship. And these other false gods that the nations around them were worshiping paled in comparison and were not worthy of Israel's worship. This was the purpose of Genesis 1 and 2. That does not, however, mean that Genesis 1 and 2 are not true and are just a made-up story. Rather, it just means that the story and the truth that it is communicating is written in such a way to combat the culture around them and to show theologically that Yahweh is the one true powerful God. The purpose of the biblical creation story is not science and the scientific origins of the universe. It's not chronology to tell you the chronological things that happened. It is theological messaging. Now that you understand the cultural context and ultimate purpose of the passage, there is another aspect to gain from this cultural connection: the idea of ordering a cosmic temple. The creation myth accounts don't seem concerned with explaining where this pre-existing chaotic material came from. Instead, they are concerned with when the gods turned chaos into order and established the current order of the cosmic temple. Understanding the cosmic temple is the next key to understanding Genesis 1 through 3 and what it's talking about. And that will be what we look at in the next video.